لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, we ask Allah to send His greatest peace and blessings upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We praise Allah for all the blessings He has given us, and the greatest blessing being that He allowed us to be of the ones who remain steadfast, dedicated, and loyal on the path of our Master after the Prophet, the commander of the faithful, the prince of the believers, the protector of the Prophet and his message, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. We praise Allah for this blessing and every blessing, for without Allah we would have nothing. Assalamu alaikum, my dear respected brothers and sisters, my dear respected elders, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We've come tonight together in a greatly honorable occasion. And this occasion is not to be taken lightly. So first and foremost, I send you all our condolences in these nights as we commemorate and we remember Our Lady Fatima alayha salam. I want you to take a brief moment to think to yourself, when you think of Lady Fatima, when you hear her name, Fatima, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Just take a brief moment before we delve into this presentation tonight, before we delve into this reflection. I want you to take a brief moment and think to yourself, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you remember the name Fatima? So before I left my house, I told my wife to pray for me. And I asked her before I left, said, Habibti, please pray for me. She said, always. And then before I left, I asked her the same question that I asked you all tonight. What is the first thing that you think about when you hear the name Fatima? I told her, don't give it too much thought, just give me the first thing that comes to mind. And she said, a young mother. My wife also being a young mother. And also we have young mothers and mothers in the audience. And inshallah, soon to be, or inshallah in the future, young mothers to be. And for those of us who are fathers in the audience, or inshallah will be fathers, listen to the story of Lady Fatima and pay close attention. Because the example of Lady Fatima is not just one that we look to as the exemplar of how one should be. It's not just merely that great virtue that she had as an honorable woman. It's not that we can relate to her in almost every aspect if we truly spend the time to listen. But rather, Lady Fatima alayhi salam was that complete person. That complete individual for men and women alike to look to and see, this is the path of God. This is my salvation. This is what the Holy Prophet ﷺ gave to us as a continuation of his own self. Even though Lady Fatima alayhi salam, that young mother who would die at the age of 18, would soon follow her father. So when we come to this reflection of Lady Fatima alayhi salam and thinking about her life and her death, some questions come to mind. And some contemplations begin. As in, why did she die so young? Why did Lady Fatima alayhi salam die at that age and so soon after the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him? And why was it that Fatima alayhi salam, when she was buried in secret at night? She would tell Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam how she wanted to be buried. There wasn't only a tragedy or a sorrow that came with the death of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and the death of Lady Fatima alayhi salam, but it continued through the way that she was buried. Why was she buried in secret? Why was she buried at night? Why is it that Lady Fatima's grave is unknown to us? For those of you who have gone to Hajj, have gone to Mecca, Usually you'll either go to Medina right before your pilgrimage, or sometimes after it, or sometimes both. In Medina, when you go and you visit the Holy Prophet's shrine, the Mosque of Rasulullah, you're definitely going to turn and look towards the Baqi' cemetery. And when you look at the Baqi' cemetery, you're looking for the grave of Fatima and you will not find it. Why? Now we can go into history and we can examine the different traditions and we can see what the historians say from all schools of thought, those within Islam and those outside of it. But when we look to our scholars, we see a continued emphasis to look towards the words of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. When you look at the tragedy of Ashura and you want to understand what took place at Ashura and what kind of implication did it have on the ummah, you look towards the speech or the sermon of Lady Zainab in the court of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. You look to the sermon of Imam Zayn al-Abidin before Yazid, in which he tells him what Tawheed is, in which he tells him what the Risala was, in which he tells him the relationship that he has with Rasulullah. And the difference between Ali ibn al-Husayn, Husayn ibn Ali, and Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Lady Fatima alayhi salam does something pretty similar in her sermon of Fadak. When you look at the sermon of Fadak, you will understand the socio-political context of the time. And you'll understand the theological framework, our creed, our beliefs, that we derive from Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. You see, the situation had come to be an exceptional one, where Lady Fatima alayhi salam, soon after the death of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, as she and her husband Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen, were busy tending to the body of Rasulullah. He had just passed away, burying the Holy Prophet. You would think that our Holy Prophet had a grand funeral. He didn't. Some of the companions were busy looking to see what's next. What will the ummah face now? And of course, this is a very sensitive discussion across our schools of thought, as Shia, as followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. And as we have these discussions, when it comes to our history, within our school of thought, or with our brothers and sisters from the other schools of thought, our Sunni brothers and sisters, definitely history is a very sensitive one. Why? Because there are different narratives. And the personalities of that time are looked at in different ways. So our scholars advise us that when it comes to the study of history, look to the books. Look to the books. And discuss intellectually. Discuss in a scholarly fashion. And if you don't know, always say, I don't know. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, peace and blessings be upon him, tells us that half of knowledge is to say, I don't know. Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam says, the one who has abandoned the phrase, I don't know, shall meet his destruction. So when it comes to these discussions of history, of narrative, of what took place, what happened, we look towards Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. And yes, our scholars continue to advise us, when it comes to these sensitive conversations, make sure that you approach it in the most considerate way possible. But at the end of the day, we emphasize that we have to look at history in order to understand our identity, in order to understand our creed, in order to understand our faith. We look to our history. Because without history, we wouldn't know who we are. Lady Fatima alayhi salam, when it comes to the sermon of Fadak, what I'd like to do tonight, brothers and sisters, is I'd like to begin this contemplation, this reflection upon the words of Lady Fatima alayhi salam, who she will tell us the landscape of that time. She will give us the guidance in what happened and how it took place and what was her perspective by the words that she emphasized. So given the short period of time that we have together, this is going to be more so of a highlight-based approach. So we're not going to go in all the detail. But any of you who would like to read the sermon of Lady Fatima alayhi salam, her sermon on Fadak, you can easily find it online. And if you go and just do a sermon on Fadak search on Google, you'll see a number of books on alislam.org. One of them is a book by, it's a short publication actually, it's only about 40 to 50 pages, by Ayatollah Gulbaigani. It's called Fatimiyya is Ashura. In that book, he has a little bit of an analysis. And then the sermon of Lady Fatima alayhi salam on Fadak is translated. And you can find the translation in a number of other publications as well. This book, and I'm mentioning these examples for a reason, which I'll get to. This book, for example, The Life of Fatima al-Zahra, The Principle of All Women by Allama al-Qarashi, he has a book for each one of the members of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And when it comes to his analysis, it's a lot of information. A lot of information is brought forward in these books. So if you want to get something that is providing a decent amount of information when it comes to the lives of the Imams, take a look at some of these books, amongst many others. I mention books, why? As students of our faith, as students of our school of thought, all together, collectively, all of us here, we shouldn't limit our understanding to our faith simply through one discussion or one lecture, one presentation. It's excellent that we're all either coming out here or listening at home to a presentation, to a lecture, to a majlis. It's beautiful. This is one of the things that we continue to do in following what Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam told us in his beautiful saying, Ahyu amrana. Rahimallah man ahya amrana. Bring life to our cause. May Allah have mercy to those who bring life to our cause. And that's what we're doing here. But this is only one way. For us to learn more, we need to pick up books. So, to all young and old in the audience, I will say this. As your young brother, please, don't limit what you learn tonight to this presentation and what I'm saying. Go and read the sermon of Fatima alayhi salam on Fadak. And go and read books about Lady Fatima and other books on our faith at large. Once you begin making books a part of your life, you're going to see your faith and you're going to see your relationship with these individuals on a totally different level. And I'll admit to you, I didn't always read books. I didn't. But it wasn't until I was forced, or I forced myself essentially, forced myself to make it a habit. And it took time. Sometimes I couldn't even read 5 pages a day. Now it's completely different. It took time. But it took a commitment. So on that note, brothers and sisters, inshallah, one thing that we can be inspired in doing in these nights is picking up books and trying to understand on a deeper level our relationship with Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam and our relationship with our faith and ultimately our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, when we look at the sermon of Fadak, let's take a look at where it took place and how it took place. Fadak was a land that belonged to Lady Fatima alayhi salam that was gifted to her by Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. Our holy prophet, during his life, owned and administered this land. Lady Fatima alayhi salam inherited that from him. Now, when the new caliphate came into power, the first caliph, one of his first matters of business, came to the allocation of properties that existed in the community. And one of the properties that came to mind was that property called Fadak, that was for Lady Fatima alayhi salam. And that property was definitely an expansive one. It was a beautiful land. And economically, it was doing really well. It was actually doing great business-wise. The caliph said that when it came to the land of Fadak, this land could not be inherited to the sons or daughters of Fatima, the sons or daughters of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That Fatima alayhi salam could not inherit. Why? Because those who are the children of the prophets do not inherit from the prophets. Instead, the policy that I mandated was that anything that belonged to Rasulullah now became under the ownership of the ummah, under the ownership of the believers, the Muslims themselves. Mind you, this particular thing that took place, as in the taking of the land that was Fadak, that was for Fatima alayhi salam, was one of a number of other offenses that Lady Fatima had endured soon after the life of the Holy Prophet had passed. When it came to Fadak, in this decision, Imam Ali alayhi salam and Lady Fatima had a number of conversations with the Caliphate. But the policy would not change. So Lady Fatima, spontaneously, one would say, as this was not planned in the eyes of the people, as in people didn't know that this was going to take place, Lady Fatima alayhi salam made her way to the mosque of Rasulullah, where a score of people had been gathered, and the Khalifa was sitting. So this was a huge gathering of people. Lady Fatima alayhi salam walked into that gathering. And when Lady Fatima came forward, people knew and took notice. She, of course, was dressed in the most modest of dressing. And she had a very long garb that she was wearing. When she walked into the gathering, it was all silence. All the murmurs and the discussions and the conversations that were taking place all came to a complete silence. And when she walked in, she let out a few mournful sighs. The sigh of Fatima was something special, was something that people, when they heard the sigh of Fatima, it was like the cries of the heavens. So automatically, the mood in the masjid of Rasulullah had completely changed. Mind you, when we walk into a majlis, imagine yourself during Muharram, and the lights are dimmed, and people are crying, people are mourning, listening to the story of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. Imagine that sort of scene. People lamenting. It became a completely different atmosphere when Lady Fatima came in and she let out those mournful sighs. And she made it known that she would be speaking and she would give a speech, a sermon. So then a sitar was put, a veil was put up so that Lady Fatima could give her sermon behind that veil. But everyone could hear her, loud and clear. I want you to imagine with me as I go through some excerpts of Lady Fatima's sermon. Mind you, in these past weeks, the land of Fadak has been taken from her. An offense has made on her and her family and her husband Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. The new structure of power and the individual at the helm, the new Khalifa, is sitting there in Masjid Rasulullah. Lady Fatima begins in describing the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, establishing to people in the name of God, the oneness of Allah and the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She says, praise be to Allah, that which He bestowed upon us, and thanks be to Him for all that which He inspired, and tribute be to Him that which He provided from prevalent favors which He created, and abundant benefactions which He offered, and perfect grants which He presented, that their number is much too plentiful to compute, and too vast to measure. Their limit was too distant to realize. Lady Fatima would go on to describe the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and her immaculate understanding of the oneness of God. She would go on to describe Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as he was sent to mankind as a mercy to all of them, as the seal of God's prophets, as the one who would bring this perfect religion to them, to the people before her. Lady Fatima alayhi salam would go on to now focus on the Holy Quran as the trust of Allah to the people before her. And she would tell them, you are Allah's servants at His command and His prohibition. You are the bearers of His religion and His revelation. You are Allah's trusted ones with yourselves and His messengers to the nations. Among you He has a right, a covenant He brought onto you, and an heir He left over you. And that is the eloquent book of Allah, the word of truth. So far, Lady Fatima alayhi salam establishes in the name of God His oneness, the prophethood of Rasulullah, and the book of God as that trust upon you all. She continues, O people, اعلموا أني فاطمة وأبي محمد. This is something that many people, when they look to the sermon of Fadak, this line always stands out to be profound, even though it's such a simple line. Of course, when you look at Lady Fatima alayhi salam, you're always looking at who does she have a relationship with. The honor of her being the daughter of Rasulullah. It's always there, first and foremost. But in this context, Lady Fatima alayhi salam is not just doing it to say, I am an honorable individual because I am the daughter of Rasulullah. There's a theological basis to this as a reminder to everyone listening. All the muhajirun, the immigrants who came from Mecca to Medina with Rasulullah, all the Ansar, those who supported Rasulullah and the Muslims who came from outside of Medina to establish this new community, all of them were listening. She says, اعلموا أني فاطمة وأبي محمد. O people, know that I am Fatima and my father is Muhammad, and I say this repeatedly and I initiate it continually. I say not what I say mistakenly, nor do I do what I do aimlessly. And then she recites from the Holy Quran. Now hath come unto you an apostle from amongst yourselves. It grieves him that you should perish. Ardently anxious is he over you. To the believers he is most kind and merciful. اعلموا أني فاطمة وأبي محمد. Know that I am Fatima and my father is Muhammad. I say this continually. This verse from the Holy Quran reminds them of a number of things. The relationship that Rasulullah has with the people, that he came from amongst them as a guide for them. He is anxious so that they are not ones to perish. He is anxious that they are not led astray. He is anxious that they stay guided. And Lady Fatima alayhi salam connects this with her relationship with him. I am the daughter of Muhammad. He is anxious that he does not want you to perish. What is the relationship between Fatima, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the people so they may not perish? Rasulullah on a number of occasions, he would emphasize, Fatima bid'atun minni. Fatima bid'atun minni. Fatima is a piece of me. Fatima is of me and I am of her. Whoever angers her has angered me, and whoever angers me has angered Allah. The relationship is clear. It's not merely because she is a descendant, she is an offspring of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's a theological foundation here, one that connects us ultimately to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you wish to be one who follows Muhammad, you have to follow Fatima. And if you are at odds with Fatima, then you are at odds with Muhammad. And if you are at odds with Muhammad, you are at odds with Allah. Lady Fatima alayhi salam is making it clear, connecting that relationship that she has with Rasulullah. And she continues with the relationship that Rasulullah has with Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen. Thus, if you identify and you recognize him, Rasulullah, you shall realize that he is my father and not the father of any of your women. And he is the brother of my cousin, my husband, Ali ibn Abi Talib, rather than any of your men. What an excellent assistant to him he was. May the blessings of Allah be upon him and his progeny. And then she goes on to describe Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen. If you want a lesson, a comprehensive lesson on how should we look at Ahlul Bayt, how should we look at Rasulullah, how should we look at the Quran, how should we look at these relationships in this crucial period of time. Mind you, brothers and sisters, this period of time would define generations, centuries to come. The way we look at this period of time is so quintessential to our understanding of our religion, of our faith. Lady Fatima alayhi salam goes on to describe Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen, in her sermon to all of the people that are present. She says, whenever they ignited the fire of war, Allah extinguished it. And whenever the thorn of the devil appeared, or a mouth of the polytheist opened up wide in defiance, Rasulullah would send his brother Ali ibn Abi Talib into its flames, who did not come back until he trod its head with the sole of his foot and extinguished its flames with his sword, Dhul Fiqar. Keep connecting. The simple relationship that's existing here, as in, who's Ali ibn Abi Talib? Who is Ali ibn Abi Talib? Who is Fatima al-Zahra? Who are they? Are they simply just beloved people that belong to the Prophet's household? Or is there a theological, a creed-based foundation that we look at them and we see, if you want to be on the path of Rasulullah who had just passed, holding on to these individuals who are not just part and parcel of the faith, they are the faith itself. Ali ibn Abi Talib, as the guardian of Rasulullah, when we begin and we say, Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana li hadha, this wilayah of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, the commander of the faith, the protector of the believers, the prince of the believers, the protector of the Prophet and himself, it's not just something poetic that we're saying. It's a declaration of creed. First and foremost within our hearts. Not something that we go out into the streets and we shout out loud. Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen, doesn't need that from us. Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam don't need us to go out into the streets and shout out loud our creed. In fact, there are times, as guided to us by Ahlul Bayt and as guided to us by our scholars, sometimes you have to be quiet. Sometimes you have to be diplomatic. Sometimes you have to be mindful of your surroundings. In fact, all of the times you have to be mindful of your surroundings. Because Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam did not leave behind companions and followers that were hasty, that were unwise, that were not conscientious of their surroundings. Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, in Sermon 15 of Nahj al-Balagha, he explains, again, like we said from the very beginning, you want to understand the history, the socio-political context of the time that you're trying to look at, look to the sermons of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam describes this period of time in which his rights were taken away. And he says, throughout the adversity, though there was pricking in my eye, I chose patience throughout the adversity and I stayed my chest to the ground. During this period of time, there was a small band of people, some of the companions of Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, that stood ardently against the new administration that took on this new structure of governance called the Khilafah. There was 12 men actually, between 6 of the Muhajirun and 6 from the Ansar. Some of the companions of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam that you know, if you know of the 4 companions of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhim salam that were guaranteed paradise by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, and they were coined as the Shia of Ali ibn Abi Talib. They were included in this group. Abi Dhar, Salman, Miqdad, Ammar. These individuals, they weren't standing idly by. They were waiting for the becking call of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Whatever you need, we're here. But it wasn't enough. And Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, during this time, him and Lady Fatima, they knew by Rasulullah, the will of the Holy Prophet was that they are to choose patience. And that they are going to stay throughout the adversity. And though that their rights were going to be taken away. Though that their rights were going to be taken away, they were to choose patience throughout the adversity. But Lady Fatima alayhi salam played a significant role in this period of time in making it clear who she was, who her husband Ali ibn Abi Talib was as the Imam of his time, who Rasulullah was. Mind you, brothers and sisters, in identifying all of this, look at this as an explanation of our usul al-din. And that is what theology is. That is what our creed is. Essentially, it is those pillars of faith. Our belief in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and all of the prophets that came before him were once sent as part of God's justice in order to deliver that message, that pristine message of divinity towards mankind. Imamah is a continuation, as the fourth pillar of Islam, is a continuation of that risala, of that nubuwwah. And finally, resurrection, ma'ad, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He is just, we are accountable for our actions. You will see the themes of the 5 pillars or the 5 principles of our faith throughout the sermon of Fadak. Lady Fatima alayhi salam, she continues. And she begins admonishing the individuals who turn away from the Holy Quran. Now mind you, the claims that came at the final days of the Holy Prophet's life, and soon after you would see this as policies of the first and second caliphates. And we see this in our history, written in both schools, within the Shia school of thought, and our brothers and sisters from the Sunni school of thought. When it came to the perspective of narrations, when it came to the perspective on Sunnah, the tradition of Rasulullah, that certain phrases would come out, that the book of God is enough for us. That put away the narrations, put away what was said about the Prophet. There's going to be a lot of differentiation. There's going to be a lot of differences as the time goes by. This person narrated this person narrated that. How do you know which one is which? Put the narrations aside. Let us take the book of God as one that will rule over us. Hasbuna kitabullah. Enough for us is the book of God. But the Holy Prophet himself was ardently against this. The Prophet himself would say in his farewell pilgrimage address to the people, in his last sermon, to a huge delegation, beyond saying who Ali ibn Abi Talib was to him, beyond man kuntu mawlahu fahada aliyun mawlah, beyond that, he would say, if you don't want to stray after me. Remember that verse from the Holy Quran that Lady Fatima alayhi salam mentioned? That the Holy Prophet is anxious so that his followers do not perish. Rasulullah had this protective nature over the ummah. So he told them, if you wish not to stray after me, then hold on to these 2 weighty things. And some of our narrations say that he didn't put his fingers like this. He put his fingers together like this, both index fingers, saying that they are both equal. The book of God and my progeny. The book of God and my progeny. The book of God and my progeny. If you hold on to these 2 weighty things, you won't stray after me. What does that mean to each and every one of us? Put the people of that time aside. Put them aside. To each and every one of us. Today, the Quran needs to be a book in your hand. Not just something that is collecting dust on the shelf. The Quran needs to be a book in your heart. Not something that is just said at funerals. The Quran needs to be something that we commit to. And I speak to myself first, even if it's a verse a day, 1 verse a day, let alone 10 or 20 or 100. The Quran is something we need to commit to. But along with that commitment is a commitment to Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, whom they were the walking, talking Quran. Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen, in the final days of his life, it's attributed to him to have said, Saluni, saluni qabla an tafqiduni, ana al-Quran al-natiq. Ask me before you lose me. I am the walking, talking Quran. Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, as emphasized to us by Rasulullah, peace and blessings be upon him, they were that connection for all of us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the book of God and his progeny. Lady Fatima alayhi salam says to the Muhajirun and the Ansar, Allah's book is still amongst you. Its affairs are clear, its rules are manifest, its signs are bright, its restrictions are visible, and its commands are evident. Yet indeed, you have thrown it behind your backs. Do you want to turn away from it now? Imagine that. Imagine Lady Fatima talking to all of the Muslims. She said, now you've taken the Quran and you've thrown it behind your back. Do you want to turn away from it? Or according to something else, do you want to rule? And this is her speaking to the people who took rulership into their own hands. Again, brothers and sisters, this is a very sensitive conversation. But we look back and we see, what did Ahlul Bayt tell us? In fact, what did Ahlul Bayt tell the people of that time? What was their position? Mind you, when we understand these truths as followers of Ahlul Bayt, that also doesn't mean that we go out again and we shout slogans into the street. Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam teach us to be mindful, to be wise, and to be prudent. The way we conduct ourselves in our conversations has to be intellectual and scholarly at all times. Why? Because even Amir al-Mu'mineen, not just even Amir al-Mu'mineen, he was the prime example. Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, even through all of this, even though it was evident, even though it was clear, Ali ibn Abi Talib didn't fight those who usurped his rights. Ali ibn Abi Talib didn't go against the caliphate, though he made it clear his position. Why? There was a bigger vision. And that's what Lady Fatima is talking about. Islam, the book of God, the tradition of Rasulullah, the relationship that Fatima has, that Ali ibn Abi Talib has with Rasulullah is that they are the guardians and protectors of this faith. So even though these people may take away their rights, their first priority is the faith itself. So even though it means that they sacrifice their own rights, their private rights as individuals, so long as the faith was protected and the truth was made evident, that was their priority. We need to understand that. We need to remind ourselves of that. We need to understand how Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam moved throughout history and what decisions they took and for what reasons. If you look at the harakah, at the movement of all of the imams, all of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, from Rasulullah, peace and blessings be upon him, all the way until our awaited Imam al-Hujjah, Jalal ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif, we see an emphasis on two things: protecting and safeguarding the religion of Allah, and protecting and safeguarding the believers themselves. Throughout this sensitive period of time, into the reign of Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he became Khalifa 25 years after these incidents, when Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam chose his peace accord with Muawiyah, and that would bring about the reign of Muawiyah for 18 years and the establishment of the Umayyad dynasty. When Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam would make his move towards al-Iraq, and he would give his ultimate sacrifice through his martyrdom at Karbala. When Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam would be in Mecca and Medina, and he would see the revolts that would take place against the Umayyads, and Muslim ibn Aqba, a commander from the Umayyads, would come and bring his sword to the necks of the believers and say, give your allegiance to Yazid, either as chattel or cattle. Ali ibn al-Hussein, who had just survived Karbala, would go to Muslim ibn Aqba and he would say, how would you like for me to give my allegiance? Only as a brother and as a cousin, the flustered Muslim ibn Aqba, this commander of the Umayyads, would say. But Imam Zayn al-Abidin would say, if you wish, I will give allegiance like you are requesting of the believers as chattel or cattle. Making it clear where the truth would stand. Making it clear that the Imam would save the lives of the people that were unsure of what to do at that time. Al-Hussein was just killed in Karbala. But the revolt of Al-Hussein, Thawrat Al-Hussein, was unique in the personality of Al-Hussein ibn Ali. And the stance of Lady Fatima alayhi salam at the sermon of Fadak was unique in the personality of Fatima bint Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alih. Ali ibn al-Hussein and the rest of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt would clarify to us, make it clear, the highest priority when it came to protecting the faith and protecting people's lives. If any of the two were to be endangered, Ahlul Bayt would move away from that. That's something for us to understand. If you want to learn a little bit more about this, I highly recommend a book. In Arabic, it's called Faji'at al-Taf by Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim, hafidhahullah. It's in English called Understanding Karbala. Order it tonight on Amazon. Get a deeper understanding of this movement of the Imams. Al-Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, what does he mean to you in your life? Lady Fatima alayhi salam, what does she mean to you in your life? And do you understand the reasons why they did what they did? Do we understand? Do we know? Unless we take a deeper look, we won't. Lady Fatima alayhi salam continues, and these are the final highlights from her sermon. O Muslims, she speaks about the reasoning for her ownership of the land of Fadak and her inheritance from Rasulullah. She says, O Muslims, is my inheritance to be usurped? Is my inheritance as Fatima bint Muhammad to be taken away? And then she addresses the first Khalifa. She says, is it in the book of Allah that you inherit from your father and I do not inherit from my father? Surely you have done a very strange thing. Did you intendedly desert the book of Allah and turn your back on it? And then Lady Fatima alayhi salam cites to a number, several verses from the Holy Quran. One of them being chapter 27 verse 16. And Sulaiman was Dawood's heir, amongst many other verses. Citing to the Holy Quran how the prophets and the sons of the prophets would inherit from them. And that is something that was divine tradition. Where did this suddenly come from that Fatima bint Muhammad does not inherit from Rasulullah? Where does this policy come from? Lady Fatima alayhi salam made it clear. And then she goes on to address the Ansar. And this is a very evident truth in which Lady Fatima admonishes these individuals who were supposedly those who supported the Prophet. And she makes something, a connection so beautiful that I want you to pay attention to it. She says, O people of valor, the supporters of the nation, and the defenders of Islam, what is this shortcoming in defending my rights? And what is the slumber before the wrong that has been done to me? Did not Rasulullah, my father, say that a man is observed through his children? Did not my father Rasulullah say that a man is observed through his children? How quick have you violated his orders, and how soon have you let them down, though you are still able to help me in my attempt and are powerful to assist me in my request. But unfortunately the Ansar, because this wasn't the only time, Amir al-Mu'mineen and Lady Fatima alayhi salam had gone to a group of Ansar and told them, we need your support. This is not the will of the Prophet. The Prophet did not will for this to happen. You need to speak up, you need to do something. But they timidly would say, we already gave our allegiance, and this is what the people want. And Lady Fatima would admonish them there. Mind you, Lady Fatima and Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam knew what was taking place, and they knew what was going to happen. But they made it clear to the people, there's implications and consequences of your actions, and you will be held accountable. Amir al-Mu'mineen time and time again would say to those in power and to the people that I will agree to the will of the people and I will sacrifice my own private rights so long as the people are protected and the book of God is safeguarded and this religion is maintained. I will sacrifice. I will sacrifice. Brothers and sisters, we take from the words of Lady Fatima alayhi salam an understanding of what it truly meant to do tawheed, what it truly meant to believe in Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alih. Sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. What it meant to be an adherent of this faith of Allah and how all of these relationships connected, if you want to understand truly in a deep way where our usul al-din is from, what are the bases of our theology, look to the sermon of Fadak and take it line by line and see how Lady Fatima alayhi salam, to the people of that time and to the people of every single time, will teach us the relationship between tawheed, nubuwah, imamah, and all of these principles and how they come together within the person of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib, is not just being one who was an admirer of Rasulullah, as a defender, a warrior that was in the camp of Rasulullah, but the one that Rasulullah relied on for the defense of this religion. That if it were not for Ali ibn Abi Talib, there would be no Islam. Lady Fatima alayhi salam outlines all of this and emphasizes to the people that if you were to neglect my rights and you are to turn away from me and Ali, automatically you're turning away from the book of God. And not only have you lost one of the weighty things, you've lost both of the weighty things. But again, brothers and sisters, this, when we're examining this history, it is definitely a sensitive period of time, and one that we have to approach with the utmost respect and courtesy, and make sure that we consult with our scholars. Make sure that we're not people who are just merely going out into the streets and making slogans that cause disunity. Lady Fatima alayhi salam is a personality that unites the believers under the banner of Rasulullah. She was the one who, at this sensitive period of time, once the Prophet was lost in the ummah, in the masjid of Rasulullah, in the presence of the Khalifa, in the presence of the Imam, Lady Fatima alayhi salam would remind the people what it meant to follow Muhammad, whom they just lost. What it meant to be on the path of Islam. She was that reminder. She was that connection. She was that for them and for us. Let us not forget that. Let us see the personality of Lady Fatima alayhi salam for what she was. That complete person. Though she was that young mother who was martyred and died at such a young age, and though the oppression that she faced, as one who she would tell Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, her husband, my beloved, bury me in the night. My beloved, do not let anyone attend my funeral except those whom I approve of. Bury me in the night, bury me in secret, and do not let anyone know my grave. That was the will of Fatima. In examining her sermon, now we know some of the reasons why. Now we have a deeper understanding of what was her position. Now we understand. But again, brothers and sisters, in the name of Fatima, in the memory of Fatima alayhi salam, I urge you all to pick up these books on the life of Fatima and gain in this relationship towards her. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un wa sayalamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalabin yanqalibun wal aqibatu lil muttaqin. هذا والحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على نبينا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. And let us, brothers and sisters, in honor of this majlis, in honor of those who made this program possible, and for this institution that continues to welcome us as our community and remembering Ahlul Bayt, let us recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of our deceased ones. بعد الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.